Hello and welcome. Christian asked me to record a quick video on my feedback on Pebble. He said he was going to send this, or this was specifically for the HB folks, so I'm going to address you guys directly. Hello, HB. Want to start off and say, big fan of your TGC series of games and appreciate all of the work that you guys have put in over the years. We'll just hop into it. Now, I'll just address it while I'm loading this up. I don't really have any editing software on my computer, and it would take ages to actually write a script and edit this stuff for what is essentially just me giving basic feedback. So I'm just going to do this live in a take. So it's not going to be a public speaking master class. There's probably going to be some filler words, some some stuttering while I try to come up with my thoughts. So, just bear with me. Sorry, it's not going to be necessarily great to listen to, but we'll get there. And I'll try to pause as I go over each thing. This is my second take. The first one got a little long and a little rambly. But anyways, so we'll just address stuff kind of one at a time. The first thing is, I think this will be more of an issue on the second hole, but tree scaling. I think this tree might be a little big in scaling. It's not as bad as I remember it being first time around. That one might be okay, but it's something to keep an eye on. We'll get to that in two, though, or on the second hole. To me, the big issues with this tee shot, or with this hole, are... I guess I haven't really looked at the cart paths. These ones aren't that egregious. A lot of the cart paths get very bumpy, and they're not ever really flat, which is something that can be kind of touched up. Just a little visual thing. The crowds on this hole, they don't really look natural. They're standing way too close to the playing surfaces, and they're sitting right here, sort of in the aggressive area that a lot of people will be aiming at. So I don't believe anyone's ever here on the official, in the actual tournament, and they just look odd standing there. They would need to be further away from the playing surfaces, most likely. And even if they do get this close, it's kind of a health and safety hazard for them to be almost in a blind spot where tee shots can land. And it just looks a little odd. I think there's a lot of tournament infrastructure stuff that could be addressed on this one. And then the second one that comes up on the first hole, which comes up kind of everywhere, is finishing work. I think the bunkers, they could probably use a little bit of touch-ups. It's one where translating real-life stuff into Unity is not a perfect process. There is a little bit of, like any sort of translation, there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily going to translate directly from one language into another. So you kind of have to fudge some things to make some stuff up in order to get the same meaning in your end product that you got in the starting point. So in this case, in order to get the bunkers to kind of present in the same way and function in the same way, you might have to tweak, or at the very least, again, because there's you can't get the same edges that you can get in real life in a Unity tool. You're gonna get some weird edges. Essentially, it takes a skilled hand and a little bit of just a little bit of tweaking to get the bunkers as close as you can get them to the real life ones, or at least present in the same way, even if some of the details aren't quite right. But ultimately, I don't think whoever did a lot of the work on this, they obviously are going on kind of overheads or general placement of stuff. The general placement of things is correct, but a lot of the details are a little off. The green being an inch away from the top lip of this bunker, and the green sloping hard over the edge. I think one of these two surfaces is a little off. There's a little bit more gap between this green and the bunker. And I want to say the green surface ends kind of about here. So it's one where a little bit of touch-ups need to be done on this green in order to make it translate into a game. Because I don't believe the real-life green slopes off into the heavy rough as dramatically. This edge is so dramatic that I can land a wedge maybe here-ish, catch the slope, and then roll all the way into the bunker. And if you hit this green in real life, I don't think you can roll into the bunker. I'm pretty sure. And so it's just some of the edges around this green are a little funky, both in terms of presentation and how they like playability. Um, I want to say the transitions between the fairway and green are really rough. Like this definitely needs some love. Uh, it's just kind of sloppily done. Like these surface transitions are very sloppy, and I think in terms of both presentation and playability, you're gonna want to put a light rough cut around the edges of your greens. It looks a lot better. It transitions into your heavy rough better because the heavy rough in this game is probably there's no variability to it. So there's probably places on real life Pebble Beach where the heavy rough is as punishing as the heavy rough is in this game, but it's not going to be everywhere. And in this game, all heavy rough is equally punishing. And so, like, if you can have putts where I hit a ball onto the green and it just rolls into the heavy rough, and I am now on the toughest surface on the entire property. It's a little harsh. It's not particularly like maybe it's realistic specifically for some US Open stuff, but even then, it's probably not an ideal playing experience for your users. So, better transitions, really easy to do. Actually, and a lot of I think what I mentioned in my previous video that I have not mentioned yet in this one is some of the stuff I will mention because Christian just wanted all of the feedback. Some of the stuff, it's not really feasible to fix this time around. It's more of a, in the future, something to keep in mind going forward. But a lot of the stuff I'm going to mention is a skilled person could probably do in a workday. So within 8 hours, you could significantly improve both the presentation and the playability of this course. Now, I think the second hole is a great time to address objects and scaling, because while there are generally trees in all of the correct places on this hole, they're not at the right scale. So that significantly changes how this hole plays, and I think it's something that needs to be kept in mind when you're designing these sort of things. Like I know for a fact that the trees up there on your second shot are too big, and so it substantially changes how this hole is presented and plays. And I also believe that these trees are either maybe a touch too close to the tee box or a touch too big. So I believe from the back tees in real life, you can still see these bunkers, or where my cursor is. So I should be able to hit a direct line from here into those bunkers without working the ball at all, and to be able to see it. But the trees cut off a significant portion of your presentation of the hole and the lines that you can hit. So it's like, I basically have to either hit a pixel perfect shot up against the edge of the trees to hit the right side of this fairway, which is kind of your preferred line with those trees. Like, you don't really want a person to have to shape a golf ball to find the middle of your fairway. That's generally a bad practice in real life and in the game. So I'd say, let's see, we'll do a little flyover. So it's something to look at. I think the scaling, when the scaling is off, it can affect how your hole plays, and in this case, it kind of negatively affect how this plays. Also, like, there's little things like this where there's just a big bump in your bunker. Like, I don't know where you get your terrain data, but you don't necessarily want to treat your terrain data as gospel. There's gonna be things that don't translate. If it's LiDAR, you'll sometimes get weird artifacts and glitches, things that aren't quite right in the LiDAR data that you have to look out for, because it's just not always that accurate. Things like, oh, there's a bump here where there isn't one, I have to smooth that out, things like that. So there's some of that in your bunkers. Or maybe it's just a surfacing issue where you didn't close the surface fully, but a lot of the sculpting in your bunkers is really rough. And again, just because Unity handles things differently, it's going to require a skilled touch to translate real-life bunkers into games. They're never going to be perfect in terms of, like, I can just plug the terrain data in and put a surface down and it will be perfect. You always have to do a little bit of translation, so sometimes you have to fudge some things a little bit in order for the experience to translate as well as possible. Oh, that's a bad shot. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I got distracted and forgot to mention the trees. These trees. I think the scale of them in-game is significantly bigger than the scale in real life. I think they're a little closer together, but that might just be they appear a lot closer together because they're much bigger. So these significantly hamper both like your view and potentially some of your shot options into this green, that aren't going to be inhibited in real life. So just because you have objects in the right places doesn't mean that your course is automatically accurate. And in this case, it's one where like it's inaccurate in a way that hurts the playing experience, anyways. Also, the same note with one, a little bit of light rough around the edges of this green will significantly help how it plays and the functionality of it, as well as, its presentation, its playability, it's all good stuff. I think, again, cart paths around the course. Again, another thing that makes me kind of question where you got your terrain data or like exactly how accurate it is that you put a lot of cart paths in places that are really like sloped and funky. It I know part of it is the way that cart paths work in this game. Like the default spline width is pretty wide. So as narrow as you can make cart paths in this game is still wider than they're actually going to be on a lot of real life courses. So even if you make them as narrow as the designer will allow, sometimes they're going to be a little wider than their real life counterparts, and you're going to run into some issues in terms of, like, when they take up more space, the terrain isn't going to make sense. So, it's a scaling issue. Like, you're never going to get it completely accurate. So I think, since you already can't check off the box of, like authenticity, I think you want to focus more on presentation and just kind of smooth out the edges of those cart paths so they at least, they present in a way that makes sense. Some of them are okay, some are worse than others. Like, some of them look really janky. But, the transition into this green, it's a little bit better, but you still have some weird artifacts on the edges. You want your surfaces to kind of run smoothly into each other. It's both, accurate as to how they actually work, and it just presents so much better in this game. Here's another place where the green kind of slopes off at the edge where I don't think it does in real life, which means that your green's either kind of in like a slightly wrong place, or your like your terrain data just kind of fuzzes stuff over. Like, Unity doesn't really handle sharp edges well, so things like this where there's a huge transition in shape in a short period of time isn't going to translate particularly well and might need some fuzzing in order to make it work for your game. The art of making real life courses is a lot about like learning where you have to deviate from your raw data and touch stuff up in order to fix the experience in game and make it as authentic feeling as possible, even if it isn't as accurate as possible. And so I say I gave lots of criticism. Number 4 is honestly a hole that I think you got pretty close. This one looks pretty solid. Again, there's some surfacing stuff around the green that I would love to touch up. I think that just goes everywhere. This bunker, it's not, I don't believe it's nearly this bathtubby in real life. I think like it sits a little bit more flush with the fairway so that it plays more like a back to front slope as opposed to like a bathtub. And then another issue that pops up a couple times is your interior fairway bunkers. You have a light rough cut at the edges of your fairway, which makes sense. Like, it means that if your ball rolls just off the fairway, you're not in the heaviest rough. And that's, again, another great reason why you want these around your aprons and your greens, because it's a huge playability thing that helps out. It means you're not punishing your players as often as severely for like very tiny misses, especially on a course that has minuscule greens like Pebble does. But on the other side, you just go straight into heavy rough on this side. It's very inconsistent. So if I miss here, I'm significantly more punished than if I miss here. And but again, it's a playability and presentation thing. It looks weird. It's inconsistent. It probably doesn't match how the real life course would function. They wouldn't have incredibly thick rough in this area in this fairway. It would be similar to what is on the other side of this. So again, little things that help. That it's just attention to detail things that can significantly improve how your course plays and looks. Oh, there we go. Oh, that reminds me also, edges of fairways. Now, again, this is probably a Unity thing where it just kind of smooths this area out. You're gonna have to fudge some of the cliff edges a little bit, especially in the ones with the rock assets that we'll get to. Honestly, I think the cliff edges look better with this, using this like the normal terrain mesh and using the heavy rough texture that you have underneath this as cliffs more than using the rock assets. Like these tend to present a little better than those, so I would be using those as much as possible versus using the rock assets. But we'll get to that. But anyway, just for presentation's sake, you probably want to flatten out the edges of your fairways. So again, it's probably not going to be perfectly accurate, but the way it's in game is already not accurate. Like, and there's not really an easy way to convert that into the Unity mesh. Like things like, hey, the fairway runs to the edge of the cliff, and then it like there's not a hard delineation between fairway and cliff, and it just kind of happens. Like you can't replicate that in game. It's a binary thing. So any kind of fuzziness in real life where things just slowly transition from one to the other don't work in this game, and you kind of have to figure out a workaround. I was going to address greens, and how a lot of the official courses, the greens are borderline unplayable because the way greens function in this game, I think my only note on this hole, again, the usual like light rough texture, especially here, even if it's not the most accurate, I think there's not a huge transition cut on this hole in real life, but just from presentation's sake, like I don't think anyone's going to care if you're a little bit more generous with your presentation or your transition cut on this hole, and it will just present so much better. This hole looks so empty and it takes up so little of the space that it occupies. It looks very weird. Also, you put crowds in a lot of places where they don't need to be, and like where they look awkward, and there's plenty of places where crowds could and would be that are empty, and then they just look empty. So it's like you could put some crowds up on this cart path or some tournament infrastructure. Anything to fill this hole in a little bit and make it look less empty is good. Sorry, I don't mean to go swing back, but I just realized I missed something on this playthrough that I caught first time around, and that is this guy back here. Obviously the terrain changed at some point after you placed these, and they just got, they stayed where they were. It's a little, and again, it's a little bit of the, why did this, like obviously this road should be roughly flat. It slopes off hard. So like something's up with your terrain data. Either like it clashed with this object flattening some terrain out, stuff like that. But, it's a detail you'll probably have to fudge in order for it to present correctly. Because the road sloping off at a 30-degree incline just looks and feels wrong, and then you have flying bushes as a result of it as well. So it's just again, there's lots of stuff that already isn't that accurate, but it isn't, to me, accuracy is not always the most important thing. It's the feeling of authenticity. And in order to translate that, sometimes you're going to have to fudge stuff, and that's okay. That's a place where you should fudge some stuff. Yeah, same normal note with the cart paths. They just look funky because of the terrain. They're just dropped straight on the terrain, and it's not touched up at all. What else was I talking about? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So if I missed something, I apologize. Trying to hit all of the notes without slowing down too much. I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. Oops. All right, let's get this up. Again, my play is not the important part, so I'm just speed playing. I just want to hit all of the notes on my playthrough. My first draft of this was like 45, 50 minutes. We want to try and shorten that this time around. Notes, again, same thing over here. This area is very empty, and there's almost always crowds here. You could either drop some tournament infrastructure to fill this area in and make it feel more lived in, or put some crowds, or both. It's just, filling in empty spots will make the course present better. I don't know how accurate your tournament infrastructure placement is to the real life one. I don't think it usually matters all that much. Like, it's not something anyone's going to notice, because it's kind of a question mark of, you can kind of put tournament infrastructure anywhere. This tree, I think it's a little big compared to the real life version. It's not that far off, but again, it hurts your sight line of the most spectacular part of the course. Um, Same kind of issues with this. The slopes off kind of funky. Um, Generally, one of the rougher looking visual things is where your terrain mesh interacts with this rock object that you dropped in there to use for the cliff. The transitions just don't really work that well, and it gets a little sloppy. It's like they don't have collision meshes, if I remember correctly. Like I've landed balls in here and they just rolled through it into the beach. It's a little bit of a rough go. Oh, I lost my heads up display. That's annoying. Oh, there you go. There's another little bug for you. Sometimes your HUD will just disappear in a round, and you have to pause and quit or to get it back up. Not the worst bug in the world, but it does exist. It does happen regularly. Same thing. I think the planting here is a little rough. Again, the planting on this whole area with just like kind of dropping random bushes in and doing nothing else with it. It's a little rough. Again, a skilled person could fix that in maybe hour, and the presentation would be a lot better. Uh, Actually, the bunker sculpting on this hole, not bad. I think again, surfacing needs issue or work like it does everywhere. Oh, I had talked about the greens, but I'll address that when we get to some holes that I don't have as much stuff to talk about. The peninsula has a lot to talk about, and mostly the rock stuff, and also just the fact that we're hitting the stretch of some of the most recognizable holes in golf. I think why you got so much backlash on this one and then you didn't on your previous work, because this is honestly about on par with all of your other stuff that you've done official course wise. um, but when you screw up the most photographed hole in golf and it looks kind of funky, like people are gonna notice. Even casual fans are gonna notice. Whereas, like, if you screw up, say, TPC Southwind, like the eighth hole, I don't even know what that looks like. I can't recall anything about TPC Southwind. It's not a course that sticks in my memory. Um, so if you do kind of a mediocre job of capturing that hole, nobody's really going to notice or care. But when you kind of screw up Pebble Beach 7, everyone's going to notice. The bunker sculpting is very weird. Again, this is kind of a Unity thing where like it looks like your terrain mesh just goes straight from green into cliff, and this bunker just kind of, there's basically no sculpting on it at all. It's just a flat surface that rides this slope in there, which, yeah, this needs some touch up. This green doesn't slope off. It's, if anything, I think it slopes the other way. Like it slopes more inward at the edges. But yeah, it's just this isn't translating into your game very well, and it needs some touch-ups to make it work. And yeah, this is probably some of the rougher rock work. The transitions look really rough. It's just this isn't a smooth transition at all. It looks really sloppy. It just, the general rock textures aren't really helping you here. I mean, the waves are kind of a cool idea, but I'm also getting a lot of stuttering. And, like, honestly, like, I don't think they add a whole lot. Like, the splashes are, I don't know, they're doing some odd stuff, and it's making my game stutter. I can't even see any of it, really, from the tee. So it's like, it's not really adding to the presentation, it's just making my game stutter. Yeah, planting over here also is odd. Again, that could be touched up in a little bit. But really, the quick stuff that can be fixed is a little bit of fudging around the greens in order to make them work, some bunker work, surfacing transitions, and a little bit of planting. I think a skilled person like Christian could do almost all of those fixes within a workday, if need be. It does not take a lot of effort to fix a lot of this stuff. Now, the rock walls, like, that's not an easy one. That's going to be tougher. Like, I don't think that can be fixed immediately. You can kind of fudge some of the corners. Like, I think this object needs to be dropped like a foot or two. Like, the cliff doesn't sit above the fairway. The fairway is the highest point on the cliff, and then the rocks sit below it. So when you hit this shot, and then you have like this little rock ledge that blocks your view of the approach shot, it just feels really off. I think that's why people are really this is the most criticized part, is it's just in your face how rough it is. And then the surfacing around this green is particularly rough. Yeah, the transitions are kind of some of the worst on the course. This green is really funky. And then you just have crowds wedged in here where they shouldn't be, right in between like parts of the playing surface. Like, again, I know they can get kind of close in real life. I don't think they're standing in between bunkers. Like, again, the bunkers are there because they expect errant shots to go in it. If people are standing in between them, something's going very wrong. This green gets a little borderline in places. Like, I think I should touch on greens a little bit. This course doesn't have the most egregious green issues. I don't think there's anything really egregious about this one, so I can talk about general green stuff. The way greens translate into this game is a little rough. Just in terms of whatever slopes you're porting in, from real life, they play far more severe in-game than they do in reality. So you have to be very careful about either like softening some of the slopes to make them play as if they do in real life. Again, just kind of as a translation thing, that is very much an option. Like, people aren't going to notice if one side of your green is 2 inches lower than the real life counterpart, but they will notice if that, if it, like, balls don't hold on the green where they do in real life. See East Lake for an example of a golf course that absolutely does not translate to your game. Again, I don't think there's tournament infrastructure here in real life, but you absolutely don't really want it in your game. It completely blocks your view of one of the more, like, the selling point of this course is the ocean. It's, like, ocean views, and this course being on a cliff on the Pacific is, the main highlight. It's, you want to have the ocean views, and you put a tent there. Also, if you have winds going left to right, you might have to start a ball on the tent line. I don't, that's a big health and safety issue. I don't think they're going to have infrastructure right off this tee box. Even if they do in real life, it doesn't, it just looks really bad in game. And then we have another area over here where it's just really empty. Like, this is a place you could put some fans and stuff and fill that area in. There's a good general theme of fans are in a lot of places where they shouldn't be and aren't in a lot of places where I feel like they should be. Oh, is this cart path? That's weird. Interesting. I did not know that. Again, honestly, the beach looks pretty solid. It's kind of low res. It's a little funky. Like, it doesn't really hold up to looking at it that close, but it looks good from a distance. But I guess there's a lot of stuff that really, on the rock walls in particular, just don't, they don't really hold up that well. They kind of look like PS2 era stuff. Again, I'm sure there is a hurry and all that sort of stuff and performance issues, but again, that's not an easy fix. All, the bunker sculpting, the surfacing, all those are really easy fixes that you can do within a day. And then, the planting touch-ups help. There's a lot of little things you can do that will change the way it presents. The cliffs are just kind of an unfortunate thing that are stuck there. Greens. So I did a play test on these on the highest green speed settings that you can do, and they're really borderline, but I played the front nine, and I didn't find any pins that were outright unplayable. So Pebble is not one of the worst offenders in that category, but there are a lot of greens where, again, just because greens in this game, the balls react more severely to slopes than they do in real life. So, the way your stimp meter interacts with green speeds in this game, players normally measure it by what comes up as the max speed when you're putting on the green, because that's the easiest info. So on that scale, all the greens go from about 105 or so to 186. And I think 186 is supposed to be about a 14 on the stimp meter, about as fast as you can reasonably make anything play. And then I can't remember what the lower one is, a 7. So, the real life greens on Pebble, they're probably always stimping at least 10, and then for tournament time, they're probably getting up to 12. Like, your game doesn't translate that way. Like, so it means that your medium green speeds on Pebble, like, like your middle ones, make the, they're basically U.S. Open level greens, and then the max green speeds are like almost obscene, like completely unplayable in real life or in game. So yeah, there's some translation that needs to be done. There's lots of options on how to do it. You can, again, soften the slopes so that it reflects how they play versus the terrain data, which, again, is, within moderation, I think is a very good idea. Because you're never going to get the mesh completely perfect anyways. So you might as well focus on how they play versus, inch perfect how they're supposed to be. The other options are just straight up limiting the green speeds that you can play the game on. You don't want to accidentally give the player, or you don't want them to accidentally be able to pick settings that are straight up unusable. Like, East Lake on fast or very fast greens is completely unusable. Like, again, this pin's a good example of you're probably going to be able to hold shots from the bottom, but if you're chipping from beyond this green to this pin, it's almost always rolling all the way off. Like, there's no way to hold this green from above it if you miss long, and that's a little brutal. As for a casual player, that's going to be a rough time. And you always want to, you don't have to cater all of your gameplay to just casual players, but you also want them to always be able to navigate your stuff. It's something that you should keep in mind of, hey, in terms of, like, say there are settings in this game. Like, I believe there's one perk for your golfer's skill tree where it gives you a quote-unquote roll boost, which is not something that is desirable. All that does is actively increase the green speeds that you play on. So, it's not something that you would be able to affect as a golfer in real life, so it's a very weird choice in terms of, like, realism, but also in terms of game mechanics, it's a bad decision because you can accidentally pick a perk that makes the game harder instead of easier as a reward. It's a very odd decision, and you can accidentally, like, if you play test without it, you can accidentally make your game unplayable for certain people. Like, oh, oops, I picked the wrong perk, and now I can't finish my rounds. Like, that's the territory that we're in on some of this stuff. This one isn't one of the most egregious. I haven't tried on any of the settings that actively make it harder, so that might not be true all of the time for all of the people, but as far as playability goes, I don't think you need to make any really drastic changes to these greens. Like, you could maybe publish it at slightly slower speeds so that it's not borderline, like somewhere in the 120 range for speeds, but ultimately it's not awful. But it's something that you need to keep an eye on for other ones. Like East Lake and St. George's in particular already are borderline unplayable under a lot of settings that you can just accidentally let players pick. Same issue on number 4 happens here as well. You wouldn't want heavy rough in the middle of your fairway like this. It would be like a light rough cut like this one. I don't know if the stuff in the center of the bunkers is thicker. I didn't really pay that much attention to that little detail on the flyovers, but this area would all be light rough. Again, just for presentation, how it plays, and for realism's sake, all of those are reasons that you'd want to do that. I think the trees here might be a little big. They pinch a little more, I think, than the real life one does, but they're not that far off. Again, like, this green gets a little icy. And then, yeah, just light rough around the edges is always a good thing. So a lot of these notes are just going to be general things that come up a lot. I think, scaling issues, green speed issues, and surfacing issues are stuff that comes up on basically all of the official courses that you guys made. This one's not awful. Like, again, I think the slopes get a little severe. But I think this one's actually not bad. Like, the bunker sculpting's not bad. it looks very empty, but it also kind of does that in real life, so there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Again, I think this bunker's relatively accurate. Some of the sculpting looks a touch odd, but it's pretty close. I don't have any major notes for this one. And the green surface edges make a lot more sense. Like, it doesn't just randomly turn off into the heavy rough at the edges like it does on some of the other ones. I guess right back in that corner, there's a little spot that does that. But again, actually, you have a really big fringe texture. And I think if you bump down your fringe width and replaced it with a light rough cut, I think that would help a lot, both in terms of like playability and presentation, without you having to necessarily like add in a rough cut that adds some width to it. But again, I would consult Christian on the little detail stuff, because he's going to be skilled in making those decisions, and he's navigated that before. He'll be able to kind of figure out what to tweak. Yeah, I just like the rock cliff just looks really tough, or really rough. Like, the edges do not mesh up well at all. It's really sloppy looking. It visually doesn't look that great, like just in a presentation sense, and also just doesn't like it looks sloppy. I think there's actually like a beach area down here. It doesn't just go straight from cliff into ocean. Like, plenty of pros during this event will hit shots down in here and actually be able to play out of it. I believe like Brent Snedeker did that multiple years in a row and kind of got like, that was well known. So it's just like using some of that beach texture that you used before might be okay here. I would make sense. Like, there's a lot of little details you can do to kind of spice this one up. That bunker there, again, has a huge bump in it that I don't think exists in real life. Like, generally, the bunker sculpting on that bunker on the inside is very wonky looking. That's going to be one that's going to be a little tough to translate into this game, just because of the severe slope and how this game handles it. But it's also one of the roughest looking part. Like, this whole bunker surface into fairway, like, surfacing and sculpting all looks very odd around here, as well as that bunker back there. Like, this one needs some love. But anyways, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Ooh, I never noticed this before. What's going on back here? What is this thing? Like, again, this is... I don't know what we're doing here. There's just a lot of stuff like this, where I'm imagining there's a path there, and somebody just went, oh, I'll just put the path in. But they never thought, like, hey, this just looks bad, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, just paved areas that, hey, they exist, and then they just like slope off into oblivion because you guys are afraid to like touch the terrain mesh at all. So it just results in some very odd, bizarre looking stuff that just kind of takes you out of it. It doesn't really look, it doesn't look realistic. So it's like either like touch up where the like remove some of the paved area and minimize that, or just flatten it. Like, you have lots of, or both. You can do a lot of stuff, but leaving it like this isn't really a great call. It ends up with some very odd looking stuff. Like, that's in your sightline when you're playing. You can just see the weird stuff happening behind the green. There's a lot of just weird artifacts that pop up on this course that are just in the open. And some courses of your guys's are better than others. Again, it just happens that some of the rougher stuff I've seen also happens to be on the most recognizable golf course on Earth, or at least like top 3 most recognizable golf courses on Earth. So, a lot more people are gonna notice this than notice like the same mistakes on some like the random TPC courses that people don't really care about. But anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you. Appreciate you listening to my feedback. Hopefully you found it useful. If there's parts of it that are unclear, you want more explanation, you can probably talk to Christian, or you can just reach out and talk to me. He can get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to answer specific stuff in more detail. I tried to break it down in as simple as possible and make it quick, but again, hopefully that helps, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good one.